Women have played an important role in the development and conduct of the Breast Cancer Trials Research Program for many years. Not only was the Consumer Advisory Panel the first committee of its type in Australia, but it's become a model for other research groups to involve consumers. Chair of the Breast Cancer Trials Consumer Advisory Panel, Leonie Young, explains the role that CAP plays to ensure a consumer perspective is provided from the very early planning stages of a breast cancer clinical trial.
The Consumer Advisory Panel is made up of a group at the moment of 7 women. We've all had breast cancer, and what we do is provide the perspective of the lived experience to the trials as they develop and to the organisation as to what people who have been there, done that might feel about the communication, for instance the documents that people have to read when they're participating in a trial or considering participating in a trial. We have some input into how those documents are worded. We provide information about what people will look for when they're considering a trial. We sit on various committees, so right from the word go when the trials are being developed, then we are a part of those committees, and so as things are developing, our perspective is always considered, because sometimes when a scientist or a clinician is thinking about something, they're thinking along one pathway, whereas somebody who's had an experience of cancer might think a little bit differently about how they might think about that trial or the question that they're trying to answer, a whole range of different things. The Consumer Advisory Panel came about in 1994, and Professor Forbes invited a consumer or a person who'd had breast cancer to be part of the Scientific Advisory Committee. That person was Rebe, and she then eventually became the first chair of the Consumer Advisory Panel when it was eventually developed in about 1998. And so we went through quite a rigorous interview process as to what our background was, what our skills were, what our enthusiasm and commitment to research was. And so back in that time, there were 8 women, and we all came from a range of different backgrounds. Most had had breast cancer, and most had been on a clinical trial. As it is now, we've all had breast cancer, and most of us have been on a clinical trial. So I guess it's always having that, the person who's been there, done that, and has that different understanding. I became involved at the beginning in about 1998, so I've been with the group ever since the group began. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in 1987. I was 32 years old when I was diagnosed. At that time, there was not a lot of advocacy around younger women and breast cancer, so I found myself becoming involved in issues regarding women in general with breast cancer, but especially younger women. And at that time, there wasn't very much happening, so all the organisations that we know of well now were only developing. So I was really in the right place at the right time. So I've just had my 30th anniversary just last week, so I'm quite proud of that really. And a lot's happened in those 30 years when I think back to my young naive self at 32, and now I have a daughter who's 32 today, and so it makes me feel a little bit nervous for her, but it's really nice that I can say to other people I've been here for 30 years, and that's really goes back to research and the importance of research really, and that's why people like me are able to say we've got good stories to tell. One of the important roles that the Consumer Advisory Panel plays is that when we look at a document that might be going out to somebody who's thinking about participating in a trial, there's patient information documents that people have to read through to make sure they're fully informed, they understand what they're going into, and they have to sign documents called informed consent documents as well. The thing is, when we look at those documents, we look at them from a different angle. When I look at it, I think of myself thinking about my experience of breast cancer, and so some of the terminology that's there, when a clinician may have prepared it or a researcher has prepared it, will use totally different terminology to ones that I might be comfortable thinking about. One of the first things that we raised with the group when we started looking at documents was they often used to say, so if this trial is suitable for you. Now that might seem quite simple really, but we said to them, if I'm not eligible for this trial, then I might feel a failure. So we asked them to say it a little bit differently. And so now we say, if this trial is suitable for you, then these are the things that you will have to do. And it seems very minor, But when you've been diagnosed with breast cancer, people lose their self-confidence. We always think, what did I do wrong and what could I have done better? If perhaps the criteria doesn't match exactly with the trial and we aren't able to go on that trial, and there's many reasons why you have to have very specific criteria around those things, then I don't feel a total failure if I've said, well, that's okay, because that trial didn't actually match the things that were going on for me. So it's only a little thing. There's language like aggressive and invasive. So when people hear that terminology, it immediately then makes them worry more. And quite often there's a very simple explanation for what aggressive and invasive is. And it's not what you or I might imagine. We imagine aggressive as something rampaging through our bodies and we have to do something absolutely immediately, otherwise it's going to be a disaster. And with breast cancer, it certainly isn't that way, and most times we've got plenty of time to make decisions and take our time and make sure we know what we're doing. So that's just a couple of really small things, but it's a big thing to somebody who's reading the documentation. Also in those documents, people are told that people like me look at them and read them. And so I think, well, I hope it makes a difference for them to know that somebody who does understand what they feel like as they're reading it has actually had some input there and had some influence in even maybe how many times someone has to go and have a blood test or how they're going to park. And we ask all those little questions because we know if you can't find a park and you have to pay a lot of money for that parking, then that's really going to be something that's not going to enhance your experience. People find out about trials mainly through their clinicians, but because in breast cancer especially there are great consumer networks, and so people talk and people share, and so we find out a lot of different ways, but I would think their clinicians are the first place to look. In a support group or something like that, women often talk and say, well, I'm on such and such a trial, and that often piques someone's interest in what they might ask their clinician, but generally that's where they hear about it.
That was Leonie Young, Chair of the Breast Cancer Trials Consumer Advisory Panel. To find out more about breast cancer trials and our research, visit breastcancertrials.org.au.